Good evening, everybody. This is Pastor Wendell Jones. Welcome to our show, The Relevant Church. Thank you guys for tuning in another Monday night. I am so excited about tonight's show. I'm excited about the topic, yes, indeed, but I'm more excited about our panelists. We have two people that I have a tremendous amount of respect for. And so we're going to bring them out in just a second. But let me just tell you, tonight's topic is touchy. But it's something that's been in the forefront quite a bit lately, and it's just something that we need to talk about. It's something that we need to talk about in diverse crowds, but we also need to be talking about this within our own community, and we certainly need to be talking about this within the church so that the church can be, just as the title says, to be relevant. We need to deal with issues in our society, and one of those issues that finally has a spotlight on it, because it's not a new thing, but now it is talked about. And that is the subject of white privilege. And as the title goes on to say, myth or reality. And so tonight we're going to bring on some wonderful, some very thoughtful, some very insightful people to discuss this with me. And I'm sure you guys are going to benefit from this. We're going to look forward to seeing your comments in the comment section. And again, grab something to write with so that we can all get on one accord and come together and decide what can we do to improve the whole thing. Not just a portion of it. That's our goal, to improve it for all. So without further ado, let me bring on my panelists tonight so that we can talk about white privilege. Is this a real thing or is it just a myth? So Tina, bring them on from backstage, these wonderful people we have tonight. And we have with us, I'm going to read a little bit of their resumes. That both of them have very extensive resumes. Makes me feel like an underachiever. But I'm so glad to have them. And we're going to start off with Dr. Nika White. Dr. Nika White is a national authority, yes, she is, and fearless advocate for diversity, inclusion, and equity. As an award-winning management and leadership consultant, keynote speaker, published author, and executive practitioner of D&I efforts across business, government, nonprofit, and education, Dr. White helps organizations break barriers and integrate diversity into their business framework, rather. Over her 20 plus years of leadership, Dr. White has worked with over 100 corporate, educational, government, and nonprofit brands, managed over $200 million in business assets for her clients, and written 2 books on diversity, equity, and inclusion. She has presented over 150 keynote speeches and presentations across the country on issues such as team engagement, organizational leadership, strategic diversity, and intentional inclusion. Dr. White's talks bring a mixture of expertise, passion, vision, and authentic style to create holistic takeaways for her audience. Catch my breath. Nika is doing some great stuff, not just here locally, but across this country. And we're so honored to have Nika with us tonight. Also, we have my good friend, and I can still call him a friend, even though we're in different fraternities, but I'm trying not to hold that against him. My friend, Judge Seldon T. Payton. Seldon is a native of Greenville, South Carolina. After graduating from Southside High School, he earned his political science degree from Morehouse College in Atlanta. In 2000, he graduated from the University of the District of Columbia School of Law, where he served as student body president, associate editor of the Law Review, and was twice selected among outstanding law students of America. After clerking with the Civil Rights Division of the United States Department of Justice, he clerked with now South Carolina Supreme Court Justice Don Beatty. Seldon has adjudicated civil cases for the city of Greenville and Southern Greenville County, currently presides in the county's criminal bond court. He is also the first African-American judge to preside in the Greenville County Domestic Violence Court. His judicial temperament, empathy, integrity, and humility were developed through years of service to his community. I told you guys we have an incredibly esteemed panel today. And so I'm so happy to have them and give you a chance to hear their voices. Guys, thank y'all. Thank y'all so much. You both are incredibly busy people, and to give me time, I really am appreciative of that. Let's talk about this subject. Even my voice came down a little bit. You know, some things you feel like you got to tiptoe around a little bit, but I think we're learning to walk a little louder about it because it's just something that needs to be discussed. So let's do this. Let's just start our conversation because I want the people to hear from you. When it comes to white privilege, well, let's get you to answer the question of the title first of all. Do you believe it is a reality or a myth? And if it is a reality, from your perspective and in the arenas in which you work, how would you define it? How would you define it so that our listeners can understand it? Is it real? And what is it? So jump in. Whoever wants to go first is fine.
So I don't mind going first. And let me just first say, Pastor Jones, thank you so much for inviting me to come and share space with Seldon and you as we talk about this very important topic. And you're right, it can be quite complex, but I appreciate you providing space for us to deal with this topic because it is really important. And I think that the more we talk about it, the more we normalize the conversation, and that's critically important. So privilege is real. I'm going to start with the broad definition of privilege before we get to white privilege. So privilege, I often say when I stand before groups that as a Black female, I'm very privileged. And I say that because I grew up in a home with two parents. I grew up in a home where I had more than enough. All of my financial means were met. I am a well-able-bodied individual. And if I were to continue to take inventory of my life, there's so many areas in which I can point to that I have been given an advantage. And it had nothing at all to do with anything that I've done or earned. It's simply the cards that the good Lord decided to deal me, right? And so I share that because I think it's important for us to first and foremost to understand the broad context of privilege. Sometimes we narrow it to a point to where it's only about a certain population of people. And I think that it's important for all of us to take inventory of our sources of power and privilege and acknowledge it honorably to be able to help someone else along the way. Now, white privilege is real. And it does not mean that white individuals have not experienced any type of burden or hardships. It just means that the color of their skin is not a reason for it. And when you fail to acknowledge privilege, it leads to this distorted viewpoint of what's necessary for success, the belief that success is all earned, so everyone else needs to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and create their own success. And that's not always the case. And so I think it's critically important for us to understand the distinction as we talk about privilege from a broad context, as well as from the very specific context of white privilege. And so that's what I would submit to the conversation. I'm interested in hearing Seldon's take on it as well.
No, yeah, there's nothing left for me to say. You're right. First, it is real. And again, it's very contextual. And by that, I mean, it's not individual, not based on whether somebody's a good person, not based on whether they're lazy or whether they've earned anything or done something to not deserve anything. It's basically based on the context of living in the United States. And as Nika indicated, I'm privileged as a male. And as a woman, she's had to, deal with some things or consider some things that I don't even have to think about it, that don't cross my mind because I'm a male. And I think, as she stated, when the topic is raised, many times white people will begin to view it as, well, I've earned everything I've gotten. I'm not lazy. Nothing's been given to me. Or, I'm having a hard go of things, or now I've got some issues in my life. Tell me how I'm privileged. And so she's right. I think when the conversation is moved from a personal or individualized context to the context of living in the United States of America, when you kind of look at historically from the empirical evidence of it being, advantages given to white people legislatively, in court cases, and general rules, to now it's almost as the norm. White is the norm in America. So given that context, is definitely real and it exists. And I think what you're doing, Pastor Jones, gives some light to it and gives a conversation around it so that it's not perceived as an attack on somebody individually.
Well said. Let's stay right there in that thing, that whole attack thing, because it's clearly the three of us know that it is a reality here in America, but it's really a global phenomenon if we're really honest with ourselves. But in our country, it's a very competitive country, very competitive, and it's hard to give up any advantage you may have when you're already in a competitive world. How do we? Well, what do we do? I'm trying to figure out, Nika, how to even formulate this question. How do we convince? Is it a convincing of taking away privilege? Because that's what I think the fear is in, or is it more so making room? How do you deal with that so it doesn't feel like you described, Seldon, like you got your white counterpart who has worked hard, who didn't have a silver spoon, but again, their obstacles had nothing to do with their color. How do you convince them to not resist equality for us? How do we do that? I feel like I'm all over the place, but maybe y'all can make some sense of that question.
Yeah. Privilege is invisible to those who have it oftentimes. And that's why I speak a lot about the acknowledgement of privilege. And I think that also we have to realize that privilege should not be treated as an accusation. It should be treated as an opportunity not only for us to continue to chart a pathway of success for our own individual lives, but for us to also realize that those advantages, they serve as sources of power and influence, that if we were to use it honorably, it also could help someone else that has been disadvantaged. And so if we are about a society where equality is the end means for all, then the way to get there is to make sure that we're exercising a lens of equity. And an equity is not necessarily a us versus them or you versus me or this competitive lens. It is all about giving people what they need to help them be successful. And so one way to talk about it in simple terms, because I love analogies, is equality is giving everyone a shoe and equity is giving everyone a shoe that fits. And so it doesn't mean that you don't have resources that you need in order to be able to continue to advance based on the advantage that you have already been given. It just means that now we're going to cast the net wider and allow success to be in reach for more people. And that's what equality is about. And so I tend to become frustrated, to be quite honest with you, when people see it in a negative light, when they see privilege in a negative light. And I say, the reason when I open up and I mention that if I take inventory of my life, that I'm really privileged, it had, again, nothing to do with anything that I'd done. It's just the cards that I was dealt. And so I feel like it's also critically important for the people who are able to take steps forward because of their advantage to not feel guilty about where they are in life. But there is a responsibility of the acknowledgement if those individuals care deeply about a society that is equitable and is allowing full opportunity for success for all.
So here's the rub as I see it. I know when we've talked about race relations and how do we improve race relations, the conversation has generally been, let's have conversations. Let's learn about each other. Let's learn about each other's history, and then we'll just respect them, and things will be better moving forward. I think that's a piece of the puzzle. The rub has generally come, in my opinion, is that where one group has been afforded advantage, when it comes to make recompense or make things right, that involves a portion of either giving up what you've been giving or being okay with somebody else being given something that you're not getting because of the advantage you previously had. So now if I'm given a shoe that fits and we can now run equally on level playing field, somebody may not want to be given somebody may not want to give up their tailor-made shoe that's bedazzled with a Nike Air Bubble and that kind of stuff. Or in my profession, if you look at where the response to the crack cocaine epidemic was law and order, 3 strikes you're out, put them in jail, mandatory minimums. And now we have the opioid epidemic, or even in comparison to powder cocaine, there were lower sentencing. And now it's a health issue or an addiction issue where the legal system is not seen as the place to resolve that issue. So if my uncle got 20 years in jail for crack cocaine, and now somebody has an opioid issue and they're getting mental health, the rub becomes, all right, to make this right, are you now willing to expose your family member to the 20 years my uncle got? Or are you okay with my uncle being released? So when it comes to the practical application of how do we balance this inequity, or to kind of remedy the advantage that, you know, one particular portion of the population has taken advantage of, that's where I tend to see it's not been so easy, when somebody's not wanting to give up that previous advantage, or does not want to see somebody else maybe receive something they believe they should receive also.
Yeah, no, Seldon, that is really good. And for me, that's where the conversation of white supremacy come in, because injustice will continue to prevail as long as white people benefit from the inequitable systems that show forth every single day without exception, you know. And so we have to realize that racism at its core, it's a tool that was established to maintain power structures that are centered around whiteness. And so I do think that you're correct. Unless we can have this reckoning conversation whereby white individuals are taking responsibility to realize that they need to be at the forefront of dismantling those systems, then we're going to find ourselves continuing to repeat the past 400 years. And so my hope is that we've reached a place in society to where there's such a deepened appetite for the real conversation. And I say the real conversation because it's been so surface for so long that until we get to the crux of the matter and address the issues there, we're going to find ourselves in this vicious cycle. And I believe that it begins with, again, dismantling white supremacy, calling it out, making sure people understand what it looks like, how it shows forth, and then getting people on board, particularly white individuals that are willing to help dismantle it.
Guys, both of you talked about getting to, and Seldon, you actually used the words, getting to some practical applications to try to dismantle some of these things. But also I heard in your conversations the hurdle, and the hurdle being this emotional piece. Because Seldon, you use a word that's probably like a lightning rod when you have this conversation, and that word was recompense. You know, like, I don't owe y'all anything, because that's what it says. You know, I want you to make it right, and normally that's something that is more receptive when I know I committed a foul. Yeah. But I didn't commit a foul; I inherited one. How do we? Because, and Nico, you were just saying, you know, if we can get white America to realize this and want to do this, that's an emotional, deep, inner working kind of thing. Are we gonna have to wait on that? How do we facilitate that? Is there another way to get to this finish line while they're still trying to do the internal work? Yeah.
That's the $1 million question. You know, it really is. And I think that if there were an easy answer to it, we would have been able to enact it by now. But, you know, to your point, there are a number of white people, well-meaning white people, who really want to see this level of racial inequities to be absolved. But they also have been very articulate about, you know, what my ancestors did is wrong. I don't agree with it, but I also don't want to be blamed for it. And what I often say to that is, you know, you're not blamed for it, but you are to be held accountable for it, because you're still benefiting from those systems that have marginalized Black people. And so that in and of itself I think that it warrants, the continued ownership of the problem. And so many, to your point, they're not willing to own the problem. They're willing to try to be communicative about maybe it doesn't need to exist, but and let's be fair. I think that no one has a clear-cut answer as to how to dismantle this. I think there's multiple ways that we need to get at it, and it's going to require all of us to play a part in it, but particularly white people.
Yeah, I agree. If somehow in the conversation we can express it in the way, and I think we're trying to do that, not blaming, not holding you, not blaming you for it, but as Nika said, it's dismantling it at this point is a large part of your responsibility.
Yes.
And kind of, so if the boys have a friend over, and when that friend leaves, the playroom or their room is messy, and they say, well, Johnny had it, I didn't have it. That's fine. I'm not blaming you for it being here, but it's your room, so it's your responsibility to now clean this room that you're leaving in. And so hopefully it can be said to our friends and colleagues, we agree, it's not your fault. However, because of what happened then, this is where we are now.
Yes.
And we're asking you, and to a large part, bear a large part of the responsibility for now cleaning up this country that we're in, so that we can, move past it. And so when I get responses of, it happened 400 years ago, let's move on, or, you have this particular job, or you are doing okay,
right,
it doesn't affect you. I saw a post from Nika, that's gaslighting. And so
that's exactly what that is.
It avoids the responsibility of dealing with where we are now. And so, again, similarly in the industry I work in, on one side, for example, law enforcement says to communities, hey, if you see something, say something. Hey, we need you to cooperate. We need you to report what you see. We want to help stop and reduce crime in the community, and we need the community to talk to us to help us achieve this goal. On the flip side, I say, I agree with that wholeheartedly, but I also believe it's very necessary to say, hey, law enforcement, I agree with you. The vast majority of law enforcement officers are good officers, and there are relatively few bad apples. But we need you to, when you see something, say something. Let us know where those bad officers are and help root them out. It goes both ways. And so I think that kind of goes to this conversation as well. It's our responsibility to fix where we are now. And there are enough inequities and gaps and racial divisions that we are all responsible for. But those who benefit, I think, carry a little more weight and credibility. I don't say credibility, a little more weight in that struggle, and it may require, giving up some of those advantages.
Yeah.
Are we trying? I'm watching you guys be real careful with your words. Are we trying to avoid the word responsible? Yeah,
I'm not
responsible.
I'm not at all. We need to be able to, yes, hold our white friends, colleagues responsible for this. There's such thing as intent versus impact. You don't have to own the intent, because we know that you aren't your ancestors, but you must own the impact, because again, you're still benefiting. And I realize that why that's uncomfortable for a lot of white people is because what it means is they are going to have to now deprioritize whiteness. I get it. But we have to understand that white institutional culture, it works in such a way that it renders itself invisible because it's seen as the norm, which means that people, Black and brown people, are made to either conform to it or be measured against it. And that's a problem. That's a problem because it causes those who are not a part of the white dominant culture to feel less than and to continue to be a part of a society that does not see them as equal and is not willing to work hard enough to ensure that there's equitable opportunity for success. And it shows forth in every system without exception. And so, yes, responsibility is a big word, and that's what's required right now, is responsibility on the part of our white brothers and sisters.
It sounds like we would like for our white counterparts to grab a hold of this vision of the greater good.
Yes, absolutely.
There is a greater good, but to use Seldon's words is that, but the rub in that is that it's running up against this basic human pursuit of power.
Yeah,
power, because power makes me feel like I'm in control of my life. Power makes me feel like I can protect what's mine, and what we're seeing play out are the individuals who have power, the individuals in our legislature, the individual that we got out of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. All of this stuff was about, we need to hold on to power. How do we address, because that is a fundamental pursuit of all of us. How do we deal with that, y'all? How do we deal with that? We've got to talk about that, because if that's not addressed on their part, we're gonna have a whole bunch of great conversations and some banquets and some good meetings, and we'll take some pictures, and we're gonna go right back to figuring out how to hold on to this power.
Right. That's really good, because racism, is at its core a tool that, was established to maintain power structures that are, again, centered around whiteness. And so I think that part of solving for that is calling it out. When we don't talk about power and power dynamics at all levels of how racism shows up, interpersonal, institutional, systemic, then we continue to perpetuate inequities. And so first and foremost, we have to make sure that we're bringing the conversation of power dynamics into this broader conversation of equity and privilege and white supremacy, because they all intersect.
Yeah. I would like to believe that the argument or the conversation of let's level the playing field, and then just that.
That's scary, sir. I know.
Without me saying otherwise, listen, you have to give up some of that power that you did not get fairly and on a level playing field. So let's level the playing field so we can all compete. Have enough confidence in your skill and ability to, obtain the power you want, but don't be afraid to compete in America. I think that's part of the appeal of America, is that it's meritocracy. You work hard, you get this. Mm-hmm. Fair enough. We agree with you. Let's level the playing field to do that. But what has seemed to show its head over and over again is that in an effort to gain or keep power, those who are often I put like this. If we take the last election, and one argument was the election was stolen.
Right.
These are the particular places that were stolen. Those particular places were majority African-American cities.
Right.
And so even when the policies or rules are put in place, or the efforts put in place to try to keep power, mm-hmm. there's a particular demographic that is often targeted or chosen. With the election, it was Atlanta, I think Milwaukee,
Detroit.
Detroit, exactly. When we look at just kind of how initially, when the previous president started his campaign, it was let's build a wall. And so around that was even other, for example, middle-class whites or lower income whites who, for example, having health insurance under the Affordable Health Care Act would benefit them. They're like, well, I'm Team America. I'm Team white people for keeping these immigrants out of my country. Yeah, I could use some health care. Yeah, I could use an increase in minimum wage. But right now, I'm I'm Team America, which is, keep the illegal immigrants, keep the Mexicans out. So they rallied around that whiteness versus kind of accepting the election, which has been verified by everybody from different parties. And they kind of rally around policies that creating us and them.
Yes.
And giving up power is a whole nother fight, that affects everybody. But especially if the basis of the power has largely been built upon the idea of whiteness that certain advantages have been given to. All I can do is send them to you, Pastor, for spiritual. I don't know.
Yeah, I think about the word racist, and there's been a big push of late to get people to move from being not racist or non-racist to this anti-racist kind of position. Here's the reality: being racist is not about who you are; it is about what you do. And I think that we have to make sure that our white counterparts do not see that whenever we call in a behavior as racist, that we're not necessarily saying that they are racist. What we're saying, though, is we need to bring attention to what you're doing. And quite honestly, again, white supremacy is racist. And so we have to be able to call it what it is. And I think that where there's some additional learning to be had is for people to realize that no one is born racist or anti-racist. These results from choices that we make. Yeah. And it requires conscious decision to make frequent, consistent, equitable choices every day if we want to be anti-racist. And so we have to really, again, language is so important. And I find that even when you call out an act as being racist, there's a high level of offense that takes place on the end of the person. And I think we need to change that, because we have to be clear about what is racist, what is not. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we're calling the person racist, but what they're doing is racist. And we have to bring that to the fore.
Absolutely. Going back just a little bit to when Celia was talking about some of the bewilderment that we had as Black people of the demographics, the white demographics that supported Trump. You saw Nika roll eyes real quick.
Sorry. Sorry.
And I noticed there was something that we would say a lot, especially those who are part of the media, what have you, and they would use this phrase. They would say they're voting against their best interests. Mm-hmm. But just sitting here talking to you guys, it made me realize that although it was very coded language, we also realized that, if they're voting against the Affordable Care Act, no, what they see is health insurance or maintain my privilege.
Right.
And they decided, I'll risk this as long as, white is right. Because the whole wall notion and all this other stuff is this pervasive fear that's bubbling up in our country of the changing color of America. Changing demographics of America. Mm-hmm. And they realize that right now, institutionally, from the voting system, power can be stripped at the ballot box. And so to me, it seems like this thing is like screaming at us right now. It's almost like they're saying, you better pick a side. Yeah. You need to pick a side, because our privilege is being threatened. And even Seldon, in the examples you gave with Atlanta and Milwaukee and Detroit, pinpointing those majority Black cities as places of corruption, mm-hmm. also as part of the messaging that, look, see what happens when they have power. Look what happens when they're able to lead. And so how do we combat that messaging, Nika? How do we combat the messaging and get you to the table unoffended? How do we do that? That's a tall task.
It's a very daunting task, and it's hard. And I'm not sure if I have a one singular response to that. But I do believe that there's something to be said for not trying to allow white people to escape the discomfort too quickly. You know, I don't like to have conversations where it's about how do we appease and ease the pain of white people that are engaged in these types of conversations. Because look, I'm uncomfortable. My people are uncomfortable. We're all gonna have to be uncomfortable together, but figure it out together, you know? I mean, really, you know, but I think there's a lot of merit into sitting with some of that discomfort and not allowing it to just escape us so quickly, because then I think it lessens our propensity to want to feel called to action. So I'm not all about just trying to get people out of their place of uneasiness and discomfort. I want you to sit there for a while. And maybe that in and of itself is enough motivation for you to really get into the trenches and want to try to figure out a resolve, because you don't want to stay at that place of discomfort, you know? But if I make it easy for you to get away from it, then I don't think that we're going to be able to collaborate in a way that's going to lead towards some type of sustainable change. And so, you know, my immediate answer is I'm not trying to make people feel comfortable necessarily.
Oh, that's great. Judge?
I like it. So I think Nika and I may have different methodologies in this sense. And hers may be better than mine. So,
I don't know about that, Sel.
I'll say this. So generally, I've always tried to avoid using the word racist because it ended up killing conversation. Mm-hmm. I would end up saying, well, based on your behavior, the underlying factor seems to be this person's black, this person's white, or the common denominator has to do with race. I would kind of phrase it all like that way. But as I get older and I'm becoming less tolerant, I'm not willing to jump those hurdles. But I agree, the fact that a part of our conversation is now, how can we explain everything we've gone through and are dealing with in a way that does not offend the offender? So if Pastor Jones punches me in the eye, I then come to him and say, hey, buddy, you kind of obscured my vision when you swung that right hand in my eye. So now I've got to get some ice to put on this bruise. I don't want you to get offended because I now have to get some ice that you won't be able to get because you don't have this bruise. It's another level, another layer on the privilege that now the person who's been advantaged, we're now trying not to offend them anymore. I will admit, I've done it generally because I felt that generally ended conversation. But I think now it's to a point where the conversation is not avoidable. And I've also felt like, you know, King and all the other great people, if they haven't been able to convince them, there's nothing I can say to convince them. And so I was almost to a point, you know what, do what you do, I'm gonna do what I do. If we just come to blows, we come to blows. But that's not productive. And so I agree with, you know, Dr. White. We all have to be uncomfortable together. I agree. But
I learn to sit in it.
Exactly. The idea that I now have to be quiet and suffer this pain alone should not be a part of that equation. We can all do it together, but me dealing with it alone or sitting quiet to not offend you can't be a part of that equation anymore.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Nika.
One of the things that I really appreciate about my growth in this space is that you know, as a Black woman, I'm traumatized as well. I mean, my experiences have not always been to where I've been able to avoid a lot of what I try to help others to coach them through in terms of their inclusive leadership. But the reality is that not everyone, particularly those that are part of marginalized communities, not everyone has the emotional capital to be able to engage in those types of conversations. And I think that it's important for each of us to respect wherever people decide that they are, and not place a burden on them that's going to cause them harm, you know, by having to relive it or having to educate others about it. And so I used to always feel as though everyone needed to carry a banner in this space, you know, and now my professional maturity has gotten me to a place where I appreciate when others can say, you know what, I'm in this Zoom meeting, a microaggression, micro inequities are taking place. I'm going to turn my camera off and just kind of step away. Or I'm going to choose to not engage in certain conversations because I'm going to protect my own my own self. And I think that's important. And so I only say that because you were mentioning some of the greats and the people that we stand on the shoulders of, Dr. King and so many others. I love what they have done, but I also appreciate the fact that there are some people that look like me who have just been so heavily, deeply traumatized. They don't have that emotional capital. And I respect that. I respect the decision that they make for themselves to engage or disengage.
Yeah. And this may be a better question for you, Pastor. Not a question, but an issue. So I think a part of it, and I think, so if, for example, dealing with male privilege, if Nika White comes to me and says, hey, I went to interview for a contract, and the CEO that I was meeting with made some inappropriate sexual aggressions toward me, and I was offended. I didn't like it. He didn't respond when I told him to stop. If Nika comes to me and says that, I don't say to Nika, are you sure that's what happened? I don't say to Nika, maybe you took it the wrong way. I deal with it in a way, I take her at her word until proven otherwise. Now, there's a level of respect and love I have for Nika, but any female, even if I didn't know, if they came to me and said that, I would approach it the same way, because there's a certain level and respect of love I have for women in general. Makes me beg the question, if when we tell white people about the things we are experiencing and have experienced, if they then gaslight us to say, are you sure it was that way? Well, maybe that wasn't it. It's not about race, it's about class. Is that just a level of respect they don't have for us, or dismissive of us or our experience? And if that's the case, is trying to impress upon them through our word and argument and examples and videos enough? It's just, hey, it doesn't matter what you show me. Just, you're too sensitive. That
Right.
makes me want to fight.
It's an oppressive behavior. And I think it's an oppressive behavior that oftentimes many white people are unconscious to. They don't realize the harm. That's why there's so much talk about, unconscious bias, implicit bias. They don't realize the harm in that. I can't tell you how many times I've heard professionals of color in the workplace complain about the fact that I have just harbored these triggers and these emotions and the lack of psychological safety, and try to just deal with it and tolerate it, because the times that I did come forth to share my lived experience, I wasn't believed. And so,
Exactly.
you know what? That just made me feel even worse about the situation. And I don't want this to come across as a conversation to where this is like bashing white people, but I think that it's important to acknowledge how unconscious sometimes these behaviors are. It doesn't exonerate people, though, from the consequences of their actions.
Right.
But but I think sometimes it's part of just our conditioning, right? And I think there's something to be said for that, because otherwise, if we don't get people to a point to where they realize that this can certainly creep into their psyche and it can impact their decision-making abilities, their interactions with others, that could potentially lead to negative consequences, then they're not going to feel, the need to try to fix it. And so, I'm with you, Seldon. I think that sometimes we, in our quest to want to try to reach a resolve quicker, sometimes we can be quite aggressive in that, we may even push people away, and I often say, I want people to do this work because of and not despite of, and there is a difference. And so if people feel attacked, and then they're not going to engage. And so there is something to be said for how do we enter into the complexity of this conversation in a way where people can be willing to extend grace, accept grace, assume positive intent for the purpose of learning, because when aggression meets aggression, the conversation ends, the dialogue ends, and then that gets us nowhere. We have to be able to talk.
And that seems like where we really are right now is trying to walk this fine line, this tightrope, where I don't want to be acquiescing to everything, but at the same time I can't push too hard, and you really don't know where that balance is, and that leads me to this, and man, this time has flown by, but I want us to discuss this before we go. I guess what do we do? And I have an idea, but what do we do while we're still trying to appeal to, as the common catchphrase nowadays, trying to appeal to their better angels? What do we do to make sure that you and I at least get to experience this, and not just our grandchildren and our great grandchildren, experience this more equitable country where we actually live up to all these various creeds that we have? Do we? Well, let me just tell you what my thinking is, guys. Y'all tell me how you feel about this. I think this thing has to be worked in tandem. I do think we need to still appeal to our white counterparts to get them to think about the benefits to a more equitable world. And while we're working on that front, there are some things that we can be doing as a community too, and that we're starting to see more in terms of leveraging our voting power. You saw Stacey Abrams did an incredible job. I'm sure they wish they would have let her be governor now, but she did an incredible job. Leverage our voting power, leverage our economic power, because again, those are the rules of the game of this nation. Let's learn how to play the game. Let's learn how to play the game, but also appeal to this more equitable, more fair world. So I guess so that our children and our children's children may get to live in that. And so I think we gotta hit it from both fronts. What do you guys think about that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that for us to sit in a place of feeling like there's nothing we can do, we're perpetuating the problem. There are some small things we can do. And when we think about the 400 plus years that continue to show forth of racial inequities, and that's very daunting, and it can cause us to feel as though we're defeated even before we start. So I think sometimes too, part of solving for this is thinking about where we have influence. Think about our immediate circle. Think about our families. Think about our coworkers. Think about those that we already have those strong relationships with and that rapport with, so that whenever we say something, we know that it's not going to fall on deaf ears, but it really is going to be something that's considered. So don't necessarily feel like we have to go out and tackle each of us on our own, Rome in a day. Let's just think about where we have that influence and start there. I think about my kids, for example. What kind of example am I setting for them? What am I exposing them to make sure that they know how to navigate and process these issues that they are being faced with as well? So don't necessarily feel as though to undo the whole 400 plus years is something that needs to fall on the shoulders of one individual. We all can make a difference within the sphere of influence that we have.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Voting is a good place to start, of course. Yeah, we saw the power in that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think it's a given that, the old maxim that we tell our children, you have to work twice as hard to get, what others get. I think that's just a given. So when you look at Stacey Abrams' effort, that was a 10-year effort that just culminated in the last 2 election cycles. Yeah. So the fact that she even had to do that to barely win her state is a testament. But I believe that's what we have to do while trying to make sure policies are leveling the playing field, calling out, racism and racist policies and rules, calling it out, bringing attention to it, making sure the policies are adjusted or amended to be fair, getting rid of those actors, and hoping we can build a coalition around those things. But our work has to remain at the level, we've done. For Nika to reach her level of success, it wasn't done by, working at the same level as everybody else. Same for, Pastor and myself. That has to be the standard while we continue to work. Right. And, when we talk about protests, there are a contingent of people who are great at bringing attention to certain issues. They can get on social media, they can get on TV, they can get in the streets. That's great. That's not particularly me. However, once they've done their job, there are a group of us who need to make sure that the policies and the legislation and the rules bear out what those who brought attention want and need. And so I think as we get older, that is probably our role, but make sure we, pick up the mantle after those that have brought attention in protest. And so I think, we all have our lanes to play to hand the baton off. I think we still have to maintain our workers' twice as hard work ethic. And all of that works in tandem, as you say, Pastor, until we can get to that place. I just hope that these incremental changes continue to come, as evidenced by, Stacey Abrams. And you best believe, I think it's already been introduced, there is now legislation to I hate to say create more hindrances, but to make it harder for people to vote.
That's just the truth.
Exactly. And so for every gain we make, be prepared for, more fights. So I think, we just have to keep that same ethic. And unfortunately, a part of being on the other side of white privilege is having to have your status quo or your default position in a fighting position. And I think we have to maintain it. But I think you're right, Pastor, that there are layers and levels to it that we have to keep going until we can kind of level this playing field a little more.
Well said, guys. Nika, Seldon, thank y'all so much for privileging me that I can actually get you guys on my show. So thank y'all so very much. I'm sure our viewing audience feels well fed. And so thank y'all so much. Tina's going to take y'all backstage. I'm going to close out and come back. Don't go anywhere. I want to say goodbye to you before you go. Thank y'all so much for being on the show for me.
Thank you.
Folks, that was a lot. That was a lot to digest. And we really just scratched the surface. But again, our intent is that we're tackling things that we know we can't solve in an hour. We know. But what we're hoping to do is provide some source of inspiration. The church should provide inspiration, meaning that we spark the flame that starts the dialogue, the conversations, and then hopefully that will inspire our leaders to rise to the top. And as Seldon just closed out by saying, everybody finds their lane, and we begin to work our lanes for the betterment of the whole. And so I feel so honored to have had Nika and Seldon on today, and they said some very powerful things. I want you to find in this conversation your role, your part to play in this, because again, this is about the whole picture. Yes, we're focusing on the disadvantages of our community and the advantages of the white community, but at the end of the day, this is about making the whole thing better. And if we can tackle the hindrances that keep us from thinking about the greater good, man, what a legacy that we can leave for our children. We have been tasked to leave an inheritance to our children's children. So we have to do this hard work. We have to do, as Seldon said, work twice as hard now, that hopefully our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren will truly be judged on their character. On their character. They won't start out in a hole like many of us have. That we will actually see level playing fields. Wouldn't that be wonderful? I still believe it's doable. Thank y'all so much for spending this evening with us, and thank you for supporting CYMtv. We have something on here for you Sunday through Thursday, and so check back with us at 7 o'clock each night. Tomorrow we'll have our youth ministry, Wednesday Bible study, Thursday we have a throwback sermon, and of course we have Sunday's broadcast. Thank you so much. Our numbers are growing. We appreciate you sharing. So listen, if you haven't shared already, go ahead and share tonight. It's good information. Share it with somebody you want to have this conversation with. How about this? Share it with somebody of another race and start a conversation with them. All right. Thank you so much for being a part of this. It means a lot to me. Till next time, much love.